So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Charlotte and I'm one of the committee members who helps to organise these talks and events. These talks are hosted by SIEM, which is the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and have been organised by the Wales Section Committee. So I'm joined also by Mandy Marsh, who is our Wales coordinator with SIEM, and our wonderful member network team who are on hand to help. So if you do have any technical problems throughout the talk, please just pop them into the chat and we'll do our best to help. So just a quick reminder that we've also got a couple more talks coming up with the Wales section over the next few weeks, including the dung beetles and sustainable farming, which is next week, and the RSVP exclusion zones in Anglesey the week after. We'll pop the links for these in the chat, but as always, if you have any questions or issues with booking, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know. Same for questions throughout this talk, either pop them into the chat or hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful guest speaker who will be presenting for you today. So a very big welcome to Dr. Sophie-lee Williams, who is a raptor biologist with over 18 years experience working with captive and wild birds of prey. She is the founder of Eagle Reintroduction Wales and has been leading the programme for 9 years. She's currently at the forefront of efforts to bring white-tailed eagles back to Wales after having just submitted the licence. She's here today to share this amazing journey with us. So thank you once again, Sophie. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and I will hand over to you now to kick us off.
Oh, thanks, Charlotte. Let me just share my screen with you guys, and then we'll start the white-tailed eagle talk. Bear with me 2 seconds. There we go. Fantastic. So you should all be able to see my presentation now. So as Charlotte mentioned, I'm Sophie Lee. I am a raptor specialist. I've been working with wild and captive raptors now for about 18 years. And I'm also the founder of Eagle Reintroduction Wales. So it marks 10 years of ERW. So today I'm here to talk to you about our white-tailed eagle program, which is a partnership between WWT and Gwent Wildlife Trust. And the reason why we've got these local partners is because we've anchored our first white-tailed eagle release to Southeast Wales and the Severn Estuary. So I'm really excited today to give you a whirlwind tour of how we've got the ball rolling with a white-tailed eagle release. So without any further ado, we'll go into a bit about project history first. So Eagle Reintroduction Wales was founded in 2016, and it was founded when I worked up in Scotland with both golden and white-tailed eagles. And I don't know if you've been able to tell by my accent, but I'm from South Wales. And as a young girl, I lived in moorland habitats, and I remember kind of being absolutely besotted by our small falcons, like peregrines and kestrels when I was young. And I had an amazing opportunity to go up in my early 20s and work with golden eagles and white-tailed eagles in Scotland. And it really opened up my eyes to, like I said, the full set of raptors. And, you know, I kind of, on reflection, felt deprived as a child, really kind of, you know, these eagles should have been kind of in the kind of habitats that I was jotting around in as a child. So when I come back from Scotland in 2016, I founded and designed the feasibility study for golden and white-tailed eagles. And in 2017, managed to get 4 years of funding from Welsh Government and to conduct a PhD program. And as my family call it, because I don't have any children, it's become a bit of my brainchild. I've now spent obviously 10 years day to day on eagles. So it's been, like I said, that's kind of where we started with the journey, and kind of 4 years of research. We laid the foundations of feasibility of both golden and white-tailed eagles returning to Wales. And from this research, we know that white-tailed eagles are an extremely compatible species to restore to Wales. golden eagles are also feasible to restore to Wales, but would be a slightly more challenging species to return back to Wales, and would have to be a bit more slow and considered. So from this research, we decided, when we're working behind the scenes with government and habitat restoration for golden eagles, we would step forward with whitetail reintroductions in the meantime. So as of 2021, our white-tailed eagle programme changed from a research project very much to an active conservation programme in planning. And over the last 5 years, we have now placed the program, built amazing partnerships. Our white-tailed eagle operational team is growing now. We've definitely got a lot of on-the-ground support for the release of these birds. And we've really kind of developed the program ready for delivery. And as of last year, we hit a huge milestone for white-tailed eagles, where we actually turned all of the feasibility and development phase into an active license. So we've now submitted a license to NRW, and we're waiting back for their decision. So it's been a very exciting but long journey, but it is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Normal, I think, to say, for obviously predator reintroductions like this, for them to, from project design to actually implementation, it does take on average 10 years. So we are, like I said, well on track for our time delivery. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I think it would be rude not to describe to you what a white-tailed sea eagle is. So, a white-tailed seagull, or known in the Welsh language as Eryri y Môr, which translates to eagle of the sea. So, in our Welsh language, it's very self-explanatory. But white-tailed eagles are part of our diurnal raptors. So, they sit in the same family as buzzards, hawks, and kites. So they're active in the day. And our white-tailed seagulls are part of the Haliaetus genus, so sea eagles, and they're closely related to the likes of American bald eagle, African fish eagle, and also Steller sea eagles as well. And all of these birds are adapted with hooked bills and spores at the bottom of their feet to catch slippery prey. So it's safe to say that all of these birds are tied into aquatic landscapes and are aquatic prey specialists. Our white-tailed seagull is our largest UK birds of prey. They weigh on average 5 kilograms and also have a whopping 8 foot or 2.5 meter wingspan. So, however, for their status of large, the largest UK birds of prey, 5 kilograms is quite heavy to get around. So this is why they've got these large wings, basically to carry less weight per area of wing to save them energy. Often known as the flying barn doors, you probably would see their wings before you see them. They're an absolutely incredible species and would probably dwarf anything else in the skies as well alongside them. But white-tailed eagles do come with a lot of misconceptions. So white-tailed eagles, like I said earlier on, are aquatic prey specialists. So they do spend quite a lot of time around water bodies. However, unlike our ospreys, they have very unique hunting behavior. So white-tailed eagles are known as littoral zone hunters, and that's just a snazzy scientific word or description to describe that whitetails basically like just getting their feet wet. They hunt in shallow waters because they're very different to an osprey, where they don't have a full waterproof plumage. So if they get wet or submerge their whole bodies into water, and we've known it to happen across Europe, but they absorb water and get wet, and that would actually make them heavier and unable to fly. So generally speaking, white-tailed eagles restrict their hunting to shallow waters. So where would you find a white-tailed seagull? So seagulls are usually correlated to coastlines. So for example, in Scotland and Norway, white-tailed eagles can be found around shallow coastlines. But also they are wetland and estuary ambassadors right across Europe. But also they can inhabit inland lakes and river systems. So for example, in Poland, white-tailed eagles only nest across inland linear river systems. Or for example, in Germany, they're not a coastal bird at all. They breed only in inland lake and reservoir systems. So I always say to people that any water body's up for grabs as long as there's shallow waters within the proximity. So white-tailed eagles, usually across Europe, 90% of the population breed in large mature trees, not species specific, as long as it's large enough to kind of hold a 2.5 meter wingspan, I suppose. And to a secondary capacity like Scotland and Norway, we know that they also can nest in coastal cliffs and crags. But usually their nest sites for an aquatic prey specialist are within 3 kilometers of a water body. So that's really important behavior and ecology aspect for whitetails. And they are amazing generalist species. So we say they're generalists because in the UK, over 300 prey items have been found in the white-tailed eagle diet, and over 1,000 prey items across Europe. But when we've done dietary analysis across Europe, as an aquatic prey specialist, 80% of their diet, particularly adult birds, comprise of 80% of fish. And similarly, across Europe, 60% of their diet could be birds, mostly water birds. So to a secondary capacity, we know that they can take terrestrial birds, but because of the overlap more with water bodies, obviously their diet reflects their habitat use. Another thing I quite like about white-tailed seagulls is they're more closely related to red kites and vultures than they are our true booted eagles like golden eagles. So all year round, they are scavengers. I've actually witnessed white-tailed eagles flying over live prey to get at dead things. So they provide quite an important cleanup service. And as for young birds, younger birds are predominantly carrion eaters. And as the white-tailed eagles age, their diet very much switches to fish and water birds. And to a secondary capacity, we also know that white-tailed eagles can take mammals. So in the early years of white-tailed seagulls, rabbits and hares can be quite important, not for all birds, but for some birds, they do specialize in mammals and hares. And anything really larger then falls into the carrion bracket. But like I said, a very broad and generalistic species. But we also know that diet changes with age. So yeah, like I said, very quick kind of introduction, I suppose, into the species. So how do reintroductions work is our next question. And sorry, I have got bilingual presentation, so hopefully there's some Welsh people in the room. So reintroductions are not as easy as what most people make out, particularly when you're talking about apex predators. And, you know, it's not as if we can release these species free willy-nilly into the Welsh landscape. These programs are really strict, highly regulated license applications. And in the case of ERW, we've shaped all of our research around IUCN reintroduction and translocation guidelines, but also NRW criteria. So Natural Resources Wales is our local authority figure, which makes the decision basically. So we gather the evidence, we submit the license, and then NRW are the decision makers on whether this happens or not. So these license applications are really, really comprehensive for whitetails. They're highly protected, they're an apex predator, and NRW deem it as a high public interest case. So they have been really comprehensive. And these are basically the categories that we've split our license into. So we'll go into these elements today. But this is basically what our license has been categorized into. So project justification. So why are we restoring white-tailed eagles to Wales? Why is it important? Is the modern day environment still suitable for them? What are the pros and risks to local wildlife? And do white-tailed eagles fit into the modern socioeconomic structure of Wales? So like I said, this is basically where we've spent quite a lot of our time over the last 9 years. At a national but also local level around our reintroduction. So hopefully we'll give you an idea of what sort of evidence we've gathered today. So let's start with why restore white-tailed eagles to Wales? So white-tailed eagles were actually once massive or significant components of our biodiversity, culture, and heritage, but also were and are now missing components of our biodiversity and aquatic habitats, and have been for over 150 years. So when we first started ERW, we had a blank canvas for Wales. We knew that white eagle research or the history of eagles across the UK were well studied by the likes of Richard Evans and Derek Yaldin. However, both researchers had like I said, massive gaps around Wales. Didn't quite make much sense, you know, a bird that would be historically in England, Scotland, and Ireland, but just didn't come over the borders to Wales. But what we realised before ERW was set up was Richard Evans and Derek Yaldin had a lack of understanding of the Welsh language. So what we done was bring that expertise to the table and fill in the void, basically, just to make sure that that we have records and we can prove that these species were widespread and common in Wales. So this is what our white-tailed eagle historic maps look like. And as you can see, we've got around about 82 records right across Wales, and records for every county. So what these blue kernels mean is just basically where our historic records are more dense. So we definitely have got dense historic records for Swansea Coast down south, but also Ceredigion and obviously North Wales as well. So like I said, widespread and common right across Wales. And we also know from these historic records that the last breeding pair of white-tailed eagles was in South Wales, in Cenffig Nature Reserve, if anybody have been there. One of my favourite places. I don't live too far. But unfortunately, our last breeding pair fell victim to persecution. And this was captured by a watercolour painting, which last year we found at Cardiff Museum, which was absolutely fantastic because it had this historic illustration which matched all of our historic records that we collected for that region. So I think, like I said, it's just a very sad story about these birds being persecuted. The female was caught in a spring trap, and the female kind of stuck around for a few days until the female eventually passed away. And it is a really, really sad story, but a very, very true story of how these birds become extinct, not only in Wales, but the whole of the UK. So breeding ceased in Wales in the 1830s. However, this was widespread right across the UK, so much so that the birds become extinct but completely as a breeding species by 1918. And due to them being extinct solely down to human influence, British restoration efforts started in the 1970s for white-tailed eagles. They started in Scotland. There's been now a rolling scheme of reintroductions that have helped the conservation of these birds. Like I said, they were released first in Scotland. They now, well, hundreds and hundreds of young birds have been released over the last 50 years to create now one of our biggest breeding populations for whitetails. In Scotland, there's now 150 breeding pairs, and that really kick-started the conservation of the birds. In 2003, South Killarney in Ireland, which is Southwest Ireland, released 100 birds. And how many years ago was that? Kind of 15 years on, they've only now got 15 breeding pairs. In 2007, East Scotland released 100 birds, and only 2 birds are breeding now. And if you follow white-tailed eagle conservation in southern Britain, we hit a huge milestone in 2019 where up to 60 birds now have been released on the Isle of Wight in southern Britain. And 6 years into the programme, they've now got 3 pairs. So as you can see from this map, breeding populations are very small and fragmented, and obviously are completely void from Wales as a breeding species. So what we've found is that with this current distribution, there's no chance of natural colonization to Wales. And it comes down to the biology of the species. So white-tailed eagles are long-lived. They live on average 30 years. And they have delayed sexual maturity, so they can't lay eggs until the age of 5 or breed until the age of 5. And many of those young birds, unfortunately, don't reach adulthood. So they're very slow growing populations. And with ospreys and white-tailed eagles, they have a behavior called natal philopatry, which again is a very snazzy scientific word for meaning that young birds are committed to their nest sites or natal areas. They imprint on those areas, and as young birds, they have wide flights. And when they reach breeding age, they come back and breed within 11 to 60 kilometers of that natal site. So we know that this is why population growths are really slow. But with all of this information, we know that reintroduction, like Scotland, Ireland, and England, is the most acceptable option for Wales. So with that, what are we proposing? So at the moment, we are proposing with our partners to restore a small population of white-tailed eagles by translocating young birds from Norway. So it's a wild translocation, bringing them over to Southeast Wales and releasing them at our release site. So as you can see, this orange breeding area is where we're expecting the breeding population to be within the next 10 years. And I'll explain a bit more about that. So what we've done is we've strategically placed this so that it straddles the borders of England and Wales. And many people think that we're nuts for doing that, but there is a reason. So if we release white-tailed seagulls in North Wales, which is extremely compatible for the birds, or West Wales, again, another suitable area, it would create another fragmented population, which would not add to, well, it would add to the UK population, but again, it would be isolated. So what we wanted to do was, like I said, start strengthening the conservation of these birds by starting to connect up now these small release schemes. So our placement of South East Wales and the Severn Estuary, this location will help us restore a native lost species to Wales and their important ecosystem functions. But it would also help support the return and strengthen numbers in southern England, that small reintroduction on the Isle of Wight, to support meta-population mixing, basically, to really start connecting up UK populations. So we know that this programme will not only be of Welsh importance, but UK importance and European importance for this species. So a very, very important. So how would we do this? So like I said, we'd be getting our birds from Norway, and that's because, like I said, we've got 2 breeding strongholds, 2,500 breeding pairs in Norway, 2,000 pairs in Russia. Well, it's probably safe to say we don't want to collaborate with Russia at the moment. So we've got our Norwegian friends helping us out. So, like I said, white-tailed eagle reintroductions are not a novel concept. They've been happening in the UK for 50 years. And like I said, the sister species, bald eagles in America, use very, very similar, kind of release schemes. And that's been happening for over 60 years. So we've definitely got over 50 to 60 years of shared experience. This is our volunteering team in Norway. So these guys are helping us collect the birds. We are collecting the birds from central islands of Norway, so smaller Hitra, hundreds and hundreds of birds or white-tailed eagles breeding in these areas. And what our Norwegian volunteers do is they help track the birds and monitor, obviously, what breeding or nest sites are active every season. They'll go out about once or twice before our collection period in June, just to make sure that we keep fieldwork out in Norway quite tight when we're doing collections. But basically, we joined the Irish collections last year, so we went out and helped gather chicks for the Irish release. And basically, how we do it is we go to the nest. The Norwegian government won't allow us to take individual eagles because of the biological investment, but we can take eagles if there's twins or triplets in the nest. So we always take, like I said, the smallest eagle out of that nest site, and that increases the survival of that eagle, basically, because with many birds of prey, the smallest eagle in that nest will not survive. So the Norwegian government has basically has given us approval to take the smallest to increase the survival of those birds. We also take biometric measurements. We know that females are 25% bigger than males, so we can take so we know when we take the eagle what sex the birds are. So we want 50-50 ratio for a release program. No point releasing all males because they won't breed. So like I said, we do biometrics at the nest, and we also do blood samples as well, just to be 100% confident. The birds are then kept in individual carriers. This happens over 2 days, so they are not in these conditions for very long. It's very, very quick. And the reason why we have them in individual containers is to make sure that they each come from individual nests, and they are not allowed to be imported into the UK unless we have a health screening. So the birds each undergo health screenings, and then when we hire a chartered plane, like premium travel for whitetails. It's very expensive, but definitely needs to happen. And then they're brought back and put in artificial broods in release pens where they stay for 30 days. So we take the birds at 7 weeks. They're fully grown, they can thermoregulate, and they can feed themselves. And then they stay there until they can naturally fledge. So they naturally fledge at the age of 11 to 13 weeks. And that period that 4-week period in the Welsh landscape is really, really important for those young birds, because that's where the imprinting starts. So it's basically we're creating an artificial natal area for them. So, and this is how reintroductions for both ospreys and white-tailed eagles have worked for 50 years. And then they get released and are completely wild birds from there on in. So what about habitat suitability? So we know that this 121-kilometre coastline, which covers, like I said, England and Wales, has over 6,000 kilometres of breeding and foraging habitat for whitetails, able to support between 16 and 74 pairs. We've also had a look at nesting resources, so large mature trees, which are around 3 kilometres of a water body. And as you can see, there's plenty of tree nest resources for this species in these regions. We've also done this for coastal crags. Our release site in Gwent isn't very craggy, but as they slowly disperse out, we know that they have the option to switch to coastal crags if needed. But more importantly, we've also looked into how much historic habitat has been lost, to anthropogenic or human influences. So we're not expecting white-tailed eagles to breed in the middle of Cardiff or Bristol. So we've mapped modern urban settlement areas and also wind farms as well, because they don't breed close to wind farms. And what we found is we've probably lost just under 2,000 kilometres squared of white-tailed eagle habitat in these regions. But even with modern day land uses, this region is still able to support up to 41 pairs, which is absolutely amazing. So we know that the evidence suggests that Southeast Wales is the best place to restore a small population of between 6 to 10 breeding white-tailed eagles over a 10-year time frame. So how do we know this? Well, we've done population viability analysis, which basically we wanted to know how many birds we need to release, young birds, in order to create a long-term sustainable population. So these blue bars are our release effort. So we aim to release up to 12 birds per year over a 5-year period, just so that we can create a mixed age structure. In 10 years' time, we expect 33 of those birds still to be in the environment. 14 of those birds would be mature, which would mean a minimum of 6 breeding pairs. So we know that if we can achieve those numbers in 10 years' time, that would be enough for the population to slowly grow on their own accord. So what about the benefits and risks to local wildlife? So white-tailed eagles, a lot of people ask me, how do white-tailed eagles interact with wildlife? They are apex predators and they have a top-down force on the food chain. So how do they interact? So they obviously interact directly through predation, so whether that's large fish or water birds. They can also directly interact through the competition over food. So that's either with other scavengers or birds of prey. But they are extreme food pirates. So they can steal the likes of otters, gulls, and cormorants. But they can also directly interact with scavengers, so foxes and corvids, for example, as well. But more importantly, their mere presence has an influence on the food chain, which is called the landscape of fear. So they can indirectly influence the activity and behavior of their prey, but also more importantly, they can influence the activity and behavior of mesopredators. Most people deem these as negative interactions, but these interactions have been missing from our food chains for over 150 years. And we can definitely say that by eliminating white-tailed eagles, the likes of our mesopredators and scavengers are exponentially growing because they're not having a top-down force. Another question we get asked quite a lot is, well, if white-tailed eagles directly and indirectly influence interact with wildlife, well, how would they affect our protected species that are in much lower numbers? So we've done really comprehensive assessments on protected species. So just to give you an example, and we've done this right across Wales, and this is just an example for the Severn Estuary. So the Severn Estuary is protected for migratory fish. So you've got trout, salmon, shad, lamprey, but also really important winter water bird assemblages. So, waders, ducks and geese, and also Berwick swans, which I've noticed I've spelled wrong there, Berwick swans, which is, I have to correct that one. So we've looked right across Europe to see how white-tailed eagles interact with protected species. And what we found is that there's no quantifiable negative effects to local protected species across Europe where there's white-tailed eagle present. And this is why white-tailed eagles provide supportatory and regulatory ecosystem functions to waterscapes. So by restoring them, we're restoring lost ecosystem functions. So what do they look like? So one of the biggest ecosystem services for whitetails is to keep seasonal abundant prey in check. So what does that look like? So across Europe, and these fish are certainly abundant in the regions that we're hoping to restore them to. Grey mullet and northern pike, abundant, staple across Europe, and are absolutely everywhere. So this is just an example of fish species that would be abundantly present. Also mallard and coot, one of the most staple birds in the diet of white-tailed eagles, and can safely say they are absolutely everywhere across the Welsh landscape. Also, greylag and Canada geese, a rather large prey item for whitetails, but they would definitely take goslings and they would almost certainly take advantage in their molt period. So those are some of the examples of abundant prey items that they would be able to have a top-down force on. They can also control activities of mesopredators. So what do we mean by a mesopredator? So aquatic mesopredators like cormorants, herons and gulls, species which are again abundant across Wales and also are having an impact on fish stocks because they're in huge numbers. So by reducing the mouse to feed automatically reduces the pressure of these birds eating fish. But also, like I said, through indirect and direct interactions with red foxes and corvids, definitely would keep them on their toes and help reduce numbers. I've already mentioned this, but they provide an all year round cleanup service, and they also is a natural solution to eliminate banned disease and genes from the environment. So give you an example, myxomatosis in rabbits, fungal infections in fish, or natural diseases in waterfowl. So white-tailed eagles are naturally known to clean up the environment. So just by giving you an example of some of the ecosystem functions that we can restore would allow us to create space and reduce competition for protected species and start balancing out our food chains again. So we know that this would be an opportunity to restore health and resilience to waterscapes across Wales and the wildlife that would live alongside them. So I know we're coming up to, we've got about 5 minutes left. So attitudes and perceptions towards seagulls, and this is really important and where most of my time has been spent we're in the Welsh landscape. So it is to understand attitudes and perceptions. And white-tailed seagulls are a highly misconceived species. There are a lot of misconceptions around white-tailed eagles. And when I first started this program back 9 years ago now, 84% of the Welsh community did not know or have never seen a white-tailed eagle. So you can see that two ways, really. It would be really easy to get a license through in that case, but we decided to raise awareness campaigns. And since we've placed the program, we've really ramped those up. So just in the last 2 years, We've outreached to over 8,500 members of the community. We've also targeted agricultural shows. So it's really important because we wanted to be where target our key audiences, so farmers and fishermen and stuff like this. So we partnered up with the British Birds of Prey Centre, which has ambassador birds, golden and white-tailed eagles that we use for education, public engagement, stakeholder engagement. And this is an example at the Royal Welsh Show, one of the biggest European agricultural shows. And it was actually amazing to take her there. She dealt with a lot of misconceptions. And we also were asking, as you can see in this picture on the left, how do you feel about restoring white-tailed eagles to Wales? And we honestly thought that our W here, which it represents our against box, would be brimming in an agricultural show. But as you can see, our support box, which is our E, is actually brimming with tokens, which was the complete opposite. But our ambassador bird definitely has a more positive effect on public perceptions. But across all of our agricultural shows, we had a 91% support rate, which was absolutely amazing and definitely something that the team is very, very proud of. But talking about our key interest groups, which we've branded into 5 different areas: farming, fishing, shooting, conservation and tourism. We've launched an additional public consultation where we've obviously had, I need to update these figures, but one-on-one meetings and webinars with unions. We've also done a lot of local site visits around where we expect breeding eagles to be. We've had a national public survey, which has resulted in an 85% strongly support rate, with 11% support rate, which together is a 96% support rate, one of the highest support rates for white-tailed eagle reintroductions across the UK. We've also done drop-in sessions right across South East Wales and the Severn Estuary. But more importantly, we run multi-stakeholder workshops. So we invited 275 English and Welsh stakeholders to help us to learn about the programme, raise their concerns and help us co-design the programme. 179 stakeholders turned up to that, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. It just goes to show, if you bring in stakeholders and deal with concerns and misconceptions, that you can have a positive supportive key interest groups around a predator reintroduction. So we've got a really good understanding of community comments from our support, which is in green, to, like I said, supporting but worried about the welfare of the birds when released, persecution, disease, human disturbance, but also our most frequently asked questions or concerns, which are risk to pets and children, which I can safely say there's no risk to pets and children. They're probably more scared of you than vice versa. We've covered risk to wildlife. And one of our biggest concerns in Wales actually is risk to livestock. And like I said, what we found across Europe is white-tailed eagles are actually a species which coexists with agricultural systems quite well. The only area which we can find which has conflict with farming systems and is isolated solely to Scotland, but there's many, many reasons for that. So we know that white-tailed eagles in Wales would be a very low to no a species which would bring low to no socioeconomic impacts to livestock systems in Wales. So right on time, I think. So just a bit about, just to conclude the programme. So we know that this Welsh reintroduction effort is the most acceptable option for the species in Wales. We will be going for a very small scale restoration programme of up to 60 young birds. All birds will be GPS satellite tagged for monitoring purposes, but more important, to reduce conflict and misconceptions. So with GPS tags, it's harder to point the finger at a white-tailed eagle to blame it for something that it hasn't done. So definitely a success in southern England and Ireland, and definitely Wales is almost certainly going to follow suit with those two areas. And obviously, more importantly as well, extensive work with key interest groups to make sure that we're providing support and dealing with those misconceptions in real time rather than allowing it to perpetuate into a huge problem. So all in all, we know that this programme can bring huge significance to Wales. We have plenty of habitat and resources for the species. It would bring wider benefits to aquatic systems and the biodiversity that lives alongside them. And one I like to end on, because I'm from South Wales, I don't come from a very wealthy background at all. And, you know, white-tailed eagles are really tied into boosting economies or local economies. We found this now on the Isle of Wight as well, and in Ireland. But the most kind of awe-inspiring figures, I think, comes from the RSPB on the Isle of Mull. So the Isle of Mull is the densest breeding population of white-tailed seagulls across Europe in regards to surface area. It's only a small island, and white-tailed eagles alone bring in £8 million of tourist spend every given year, support 110 jobs, and more importantly, £2.1 million of that tourism spend goes in to support local businesses and communities. And like I said, from somebody from South Wales that comes from quite a poor region myself, I can't think of a species that would bring pride about our culture and heritage, but also help revigorate some of these poor regions and really integrate and coexist alongside communities, which is very, very exciting for Wales. So thank you very much for listening, and we will open up for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That was a fascinating talk, as I'm sure everyone will agree. I think it's really exciting to see what happens in the next few years with all this. We have got a few questions in the chat. So we've got one from Marie who says, how would white-tailed eagle reintroduction impact our now successful red kite populations? Are they in direct competition with them, especially regarding carrion food sources?
Brilliant question. I'm a raptor specialist myself, so these are the questions that I, have integrated into all the feasibility. So we've got over 2,000 breeding Welsh kites now, and like I said, that's a huge conservation success story. So they will compete over scavenging, but there's plenty of carrion opportunities in the landscape. So they will only directly interact through scavenging. They won't predate on them, and they can coexist quite nicely together because they have got very different nest and dietary differences. So, in Scotland, we now know in Ireland and on the Isle of Wight, there's red kite nests that are quite close to white-tailed eagles. So they can coexist together quite nicely. So hopefully that answers your question. So no.
That's good to know. Thank you. Got another one from Deborah who says, what do you think the chances are of the reintroduced population reaching Warwickshire in the future?
Good question. So these are very slow growing programs. So our release in Southeast Wales, like I said, would be our breeding population would be localized. And like I said, that orange buffer represents where we're expecting breeding within the next 10 years. So I would say that, we get questions like, well, how long do you think they'll get to reach Somerset levels? So just just thinking of somewhere where I work quite a lot, we're probably expecting, 20, 30 years unless we go for more top-up schemes or different release sites. So yeah, I would say probably not within the next 10 years, but yeah, maybe in the next 15.
Slightly longer term, yeah, reintroductions over there. Okay, we've got another question from from Laura saying, was there any concern or anticipation for avian flu risks when translocating these birds across to the UK?
That's a very good question and comes up a lot. And like I said, this is where we've leaned on our partnership. So we're partnered with the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, and they are one of the UK or global expertise on bird flu. And we brought them in to do disease and hazard risk assessments. All birds of prey are susceptible to avian influenza. White-tailed eagles do eat waterfowl. So like I said, we were really, really worried about bird flu. But what our DRAs, like I said, they're very strict. So we know that all of our birds will be health screened. We can't, so they all need to be healthy before they go into the environment. So we know the translocation protocol. We know, like I said, we'd be releasing completely healthy birds. However, I think the issue is for many, many people, how would biomagnification, through eating waterfowl, do they affect white-tailed seagulls? And, when we went to the European International White-tailed Eagle Conference, that was 2 years ago, it was a massive question of many white-tailed eagle experts and a really big concern. Over the last 2 years, there's been quite a lot of research done on avian influenza and white-tailed eagle populations right across Europe, including Scotland. And what we found is, yes, there are individuals that are susceptible, particularly if they're specialized on wildfowl, so ducks. However, it doesn't have an influence on local population. There seems to be some sort of resilience within white-tailed eagles. So we're hoping that over time, like I said, they're building a resilience towards avian influenza. So it's definitely something that we will keep an eye on for sure, because it's, something that is a natural kind of fluctuating disease, that we would have to bring into conservation of many other birds of prey as well. So we'll definitely keep an eye on it. But it's really good to know, and it reduces our anxiety that they are building, like I said, a really good susceptibility across European populations towards it. So
Yeah. Good, thank you. We've probably got time for a couple more questions. So Freya would like to know, what do you think will be the biggest challenge in the reintroductions?
it's a good question. I think our biggest challenge is making sure that we outreach to as many people in our key interest groups as possible. Because if we don't do that and we've done a really good job, but we will always continue to reach the people and provide support around concerns. So I think it's misconceptions are our biggest challenge. Misconceptions around the behavior of these species and thinking that they would do something that they are physically able not to do. So it's just dealing with misconceptions and making sure that when we release these birds, that they can coexist alongside many land uses without issues. So that's definitely the aim and probably one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think a follow-up question to that, which we've had from someone else, I think you did touch on this earlier, but have you had much backlash from farmers worried about their livestock, specifically things like young lambs with the reintroductions?
Yes, it's probably one of our biggest challenges, and have been from UK reintroductions since the Scottish release really in the 1970s. And like I said, we really delved into what's going on in Scotland because it really doesn't reflect what communities or landowners are experiencing elsewhere in Europe. And it's definitely a misconception because white-tailed eagles can incorporate lamb in their diet. That's we find lambs in white-tailed eagles nest sites, but they are, like I said, carrion eaters. So I think the misconception is that these birds, because they're such a large bird, they are regularly predating on live healthy lambs, which is just not the case at all. They are taking, like I said, what we call black loss in upland systems in Wales, where lambs are dying of natural or welfare issues or bad weather, and obviously the white-tailed seagull is coming in and taking advantage of that because of their behavioral instincts. I mean, they like free food. It's a bit like me. And that's where misconceptions come from. But what GPS satellite tags do is allow us to deal with those misconceptions. So following the Isle of Wight releases on Ireland, they've not had any lamb records like across Europe, that have been predated on by whitetails. So yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. So we have got 4 sheep unions in Wales. We've got really good relationships with 3 out of the 4. Which I think is good going for a white-tailed eagle program. So yeah, we do work really I'm quite surprised I'm not bold at the minute with farmers, but yeah, they are a priority for us and always will be, because they're tied into our heritage and culture as well. So they are also important. So yeah.
Fab. And then we've got a couple of people asking, what would you say is the biggest learning or biggest lesson learned that you took away from the existing projects in kind of other areas of UK and Ireland?
Oh, I love that question. I think one of my biggest lessons is not to turn your back on people who have got concerns. A lot of predator reintroductions just like to quickly get it over the line. And I think that ERW has done things very, very different, slow, considered, very inclusive, and I think that's helped our case on the ground slightly. And yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned working with other reintroductions, across the UK, because I'm a trainee of Roy Dennis, and Roy Dennis was the main man that brought white-tailed eagles back in the 1970s. And I remember him saying, don't forget to speak to, people who have huge concerns about this instead of, sweeping it under the carpet. So I think that's probably one of the biggest considerations that we've changed in Wales.
Yeah, I guess on attitudes as well, we've got a question from Daniel asking, how common is persecution and are there any real legal threats for perpetrators or any kind of repercussions?
It's a good question. White-tailed eagles are not as like conflicting with some of the land uses like hen harriers and golden eagles with game birds. And it's always good to note that in Wales we have a very, very small shooting industry. So persecution is actually one of the biggest killers of European whitetails. And of course, like I said, persecution still happens sporadically with obviously native birds of prey across the Welsh landscape as well. So we're working with the likes of National Wildlife Crime Unit to make sure that we've got boots on the ground when these birds, if these birds come in to bother, excuse me, which, like I said, could happen because non-targeted persecution, for example, where people are putting out poison baits to target foxes, as carrion eaters, white-tailed eagles could get drawn into that. So what we're doing at the moment in this year now, where we're waiting for our license, is really increasing our awareness to the enforcement teams in both Wales and England, so that we've got a good network when we start coming into maybe potential issues. So if we get quicker response rates, we would get higher prosecution. And we're also working behind the scenes to change a few legislation as well with Welsh Government to make that easier for us to manage if we ever come to that. So yes, we are, like I said, taking it very seriously and trying to put those things into place now before it might be too late, or, really getting ahead of the game, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, fab. Okay, I think we'll squeeze in one last question if that's okay. I'm conscious that we are now out of time. But final question is, are there any other reintroduction projects likely planned around the UK mainland in the future, do you think?
Good question. So for whitetails, yes, the Cumbria programme. So there's a ongoing feasibility for Cumbria at the moment. I'm hoping to go up there to, I've been working with the team for the last 3 years, but I'm not an official partner. I'm just sit on the advisory team. So I'm going up there, I think, in March to see all of the release sites. And there are proposals in for Exmo as well, but very small scale top-up scheme of 18 birds over 3 years, which would be really complementary to Southeast Wales. And I think that would be it for whitetails in the UK. I know Spain and France at the moment are releasing as well. So that's just across the Bristol Channel. So they're Cumbria and Exmo.
Okay. Well, I think unless anyone has any last burning questions that they'd like to ask, I think that brings us to the end. Yeah, thank you very much again. Obviously, the recording will be out for people who weren't able to attend the live session. But yeah, thank you very much, Sophie.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you. And thank you. Like I said, I done my first Eagle Reintroduction Wales talk with Saeem. So thank you for inviting me back. And if you've got any questions, please, like I said, reach out to me on our Eagle Reintroduction Wales website. You can contact us, come straight to my inbox. So yeah, any other questions, please do reach out. And thank you very much for the invitation and coming today and listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.